During the weekends, I work at a Boy Scout camp, the name of which I will not disclose. We take kids out camping in the northern US. Anyway, I had younger kids that don't sleep outside. So we eat dinner inside after being outside all day. Then we go back outside after a dinner for a night hike, campfire, etc. So after dinner, I decide as my scouts are getting ready to go outside again, I'd sneak off for a cigarette. My normal smoking spot is too close to where the kids are running around outside. So I decided to jog down a trail to ensure I wasn't spotted. I jogged down the dark trail without a flashlight. I practically lived here for a decade over my time. So it's not a big deal. I know what the trails are. I didn't want anybody to notice me sneak me off. Because we're not supposed to smoke. If you haven't picked that up. I get about 150 feet or so into the trail and stop because I figured I'd see how far away I was. And if I was far away enough to smoke, I would. Before I get the chance to turn around, I feel and hear a man breathe right in my left ear. At first, I think it's my jacket rubbing. So I move around quickly. But it was not that at all. I promptly turn around and say screw my cigarette and walk back inside. As it turns out, many people over the years, myself included, have experienced paranormal activity in this massive camp. Some of the types of activity included will-o-wisps, voices, phantom footsteps, doors opening and closing on the road, deaths and stories of other deaths, staff summoning evil things there, and oh, so much more. So yeah, there's all kinds of types of activity out there. And I will be careful if you ever end up in that camp. Seven years ago, I was camping near my local town here in Mexico. I was part of a brigade of Boy Scouts. And I remember that one of our leaders invited us to explore the forest. We decided the first thing we do when we arrived was look for wood. After 30 minutes of looking for some wood, the leader gave us an alert that in front of us was an old man that was doing something strange. This was made stranger because people weren't able to enter the forest after 8 p.m. So we were really confused about his presence. We were only there ourselves because the leader reserved a place to give us a special badge. The badges are kind of different here in Mexico. So this one was about exploration, using camping material and teamwork. Anyway, after staring at the old man, he put himself into a crouched position. 5 minutes later, the old man disappeared. And the only thing that was in front of us was a big dog with blue eyes. This book does quite a bit. How did he shape shifts? Or did he shapeshifter? What happened? We immediately started running back to the camp to tell the other kids what we have just witnessed. The oldest member of our brigade told us the story of Na Horse. It's a Mexican legend that states that special persons can transform into certain animals with a specific purpose. Others say that they are lost spirits trying to search for peace in the afterlife. That night, the leaders decided to move the tents to a little bunker up the hill. That night, all the kids were paranoid about the events they'd witnessed. So they decided that we were going to be safer and a little bunker. After that experience, the brigade decided that the exploration bad was going to be cancelled for some time, which was no fun for some of the newer people. But I guess I can understand if there's a shape-shifting beast out there. My first experience with a skinwalker happened when I was 16 years old. I was in the Boy Scouts, and I was on a camping trip with some guys from my troop. We were deep in the woods, about an hour hike from the nearest trail entrance, and then about an hour hike from the nearest hiking trail. We didn't have a scoutmaster with us on this camping trip. So we were all on our own. But we were armed. We all had a hunting rifle as well as a handgun. There were 5 of us. On the first night, we heard distant muffled screams, but we never thought much of it, saying maybe it was an animal and heat. The rest of the night was rather uneventful. We just talked some crap and ate dinner before going to bed. On the second day, we all got up and hiked to a pond to fish. On the way there, however, things didn't feel right. It was dead silent. Usually, you'd hear some birds singing as well as the wind rustling and leaves in the trees. Strangely, there was nothing. After a while, we reached the pond and started fishing. After about an hour, we realized something. There were fish in the pond, but they were all dead. So we decided to go back to the camp and hunt for our dinner. When we got back to camp though, we found something utterly disturbing. There was a mutilated deer that had been left out about 10 yards from our tents. After we found the deer, we had heard that same exact scream again. This time though, it was much closer. We decided to stay at the camp that night, keeping our guns trained in various directions. I don't think any of us got much sleep that night at all. At about 2 in the morning, we started hearing footsteps all around the camp. Then we started hearing a strange laugh that kept going on for about 30 minutes. That's when I saw it. About 50 feet away from me. There was an approximately 6, maybe even 7-foot tall creature walking on his 2 legs with its back hunched over. It wasn't much later that it looked at me. In the dim light, I could see its face had no eyes, and the way it moved was extremely unnatural. It would switch around instead of simply walk. After a while it switched back into the tree line. When morning came, I told everyone what I saw and we decided it was time to leave Eve. Fortunately for us, the hike back to the car was fairly uneventful. That was until we got to the car. When we got to the car, we saw that the deer's head was left on the hood of the car. Needless to say, we never went back there. And I never will. I honestly can't believe I had forgotten about this. This happened back in the fall of either 2002 or 2003, when I was around 12 or 13 years old, New Clinton Lake in Kansas on a Boy Scout camp out. I still go backpacking and camping a lot. But this was the last camping trip I remember attending before moving states. We arrived at our campsite on a Friday and planned on staying through Saturday and leaving Sunday morning. I remember us having to set our tents up in the rain on Friday evening. Saturday was sunny and gorgeous. I don't remember every precise detail. But right about before we went off for a hike that morning, an old van, perhaps a late 70s model, pulled into a campsite within view of ours. These guys were hippies with a capital H. And that was my first exposure to what weed smells like. It was new to me. And some of the others were confused. We thought it was a skunk. The hippies were too far away for any of us to hear any specific conversations. But even the adult leaders found this to be a funny sight. One of the leaders, I think, went over to ask what they were doing and if they could stop using drugs in front of us or move campsites. When we got back from our day hike, those hippies were still at the same campsite. And they were super baked. They couldn't play their instruments with any skill. It was pretty funny to see. But here's where things got weird. By the time the sun was setting, the group of stoners had completely ditched their hippie attire and dressed in a total goth style. Some had makeup that made their faces unnaturally pale, while others had black trench coats on. They must have had a stereo, because all we could hear over there was grunge music playing. That night, after we cooked in a dinner, all the scouts, including myself, headed out into an open area of the campgrounds to play capture the flag. We collectively established the boundaries, which were still pretty close to the group have now goss, but it gave us a different angle of their campsite. I doubt they had any idea we were there, since we played no flashlights. By this point, the grunge metal had been replaced by this creepy, ominous opera music. I succumbed to curiosity, but I wasn't about to sneak into their campsite. I just crept a little closer to see what they were doing. They had made a large campfire beyond legal limits. And I couldn't see any give to any of the group. On a tree, I saw something that initially freaked me out. But I figured they were still feeling the weed and any of the other drugs they may have taken. For this to be too real and continue to play. I think we only played one game and then retired to our tents. At some point in the middle of the night, all of our adult leaders woke us up and told us to quietly and quickly pack up our things, take down our tents, and get back to the bus. As we were packing everything up, We couldn't help but notice the bonfire was still going strong. But the music had stopped and we heard people talking. The tone didn't sound like casual conversation. No, but I couldn't hear any specific words. I don't know how to describe it. Once everyone and everything was on the bus, the driver got us the hell out of there. The adults were abnormally quiet, and the scouts had congregated to the back of the bus. I don't remember if they told us anything about it. I don't remember if one of us told the adults about those guys, but we knew it had to have been something regarding that strange group of fellow scout from the other CTF team and also try sneaking into their campsite and saw the same thing I did. Ever since I'm inclined to think that what we saw was real, and a reason for us cutting the trip shorts hanging from the tree. He and I both saw decapitated, dark, and to severed human legs. I never learned anything more about that night. But I definitely will continue to do research to see if I can't find any old newspaper clippings about it. So I've been a Boy Scout for 6 years. I recently got my Eagle Scout, but there was one event I will never forget. I live in California, and we have an overnight ahead of us, a Hornet CV-12 aircraft carrier, which was the second as the first was sunk by Japan in the Battle of Santa Cruz Islands. Both befell bad luck as the new Hornet saw little action, but lost many men. The most notable action was when the deck, which was held up by struts, which was hit by a tidal wave and collapse, killing over 300 men among many other incidents. As such, you can imagine there have been many ghost sightings around this carrier. Things like faceless man on watch or people just walking through walls weren't uncommon. My encounter was almost stereotypical. We were at the bow listening to ghost stories. And keep in mind, they were still working on the ship. Anyway, I look up and it was almost pitch black except for a big emergency light. And from one of the catwalks up above, which people cannot access anymore. I felt every hair on my body rise up and get goosebumps. Why, you may ask? Well, I swear, I saw a shadow slowly walk across and go through the wall. I knew it was no threat to me. But something about seeing something you don't see every day like that really freaked me out in that moment. I'm sure part of it was the history and atmosphere that got to me as well. But seeing such a thing happen before my eyes is truly something. There's so much we don't understand about the world we live in, life after death, the unexplainable, etc. That is my story. And I'm sorry that it was short. I may have more to share in the future. And thank you, Swamp Dweller, for sharing my story and allowing me to have a platform.